Imagine, you stand before a ruined gate of stone. Carved lions glare down at you, their jaws frozen in silent roars, their paws enormous and muscular, as if even in their stillness they could leap upon you. Wind slips through the cracks in the rocks, whispering in a language no one spoke for 3,000 years. All around are mountains, silent, brooding, their slopes once alive with marching armies, priests carrying offerings, kings borne on chariots. Now there is only quiet. You might think of the great empires of the ancient world, Egypt with its pyramids, Babylon with its ziggurats, Assyria with its winged bulls. But here, in the heart of Anatolia, another empire rose. Vast, ruthless, brilliant, and then forgotten. For centuries, no one remembered their name. The Hittites. Their story begins not in glory, but in absence. For 2,000 years after their fall, history forgot them. Ancient scribes wrote of Egypt, of Mesopotamia, even of shadowy tribes lost to myth. But the Hittites, the people who challenged Ramses II, who forged the first known peace treaty, who mastered iron before most had even dreamed of it, were erased. Their language died. Their cities were swallowed by earth. And for all of human memory, they simply vanished. Close your eyes. Imagine you are a traveler in the 16th century, wandering through Anatolia, the plateau of central Turkey. You see massive stone blocks half buried in fields, weathered lions staring from hilltops, vast stretches of tumbled wall. To the local villagers, these are simply the ruins of the giants. Who built them? No one knew. No story remained to explain the hands that raised them. But those ruins belong to an empire that once held the world in its grip. If you were alive in 1300 BC, you would not have doubted their power. At that time, the Hittites ruled from their mountain capital of Hattusa, a fortress city ringed with walls that seemed to stretch forever. Their lands sprawled across Anatolia, spilling into northern Syria. Their kings styled themselves great kings, equal to pharaohs, lords of Babylon, and masters of Mitanni. Their armies thundered across plains in chariots, iron-tipped weapons flashing. Their diplomats wrote letters on clay tablets to queens of Egypt. Their gods numbered in the thousands, a teeming, bewildering pantheon of storm lords, sun goddesses, river spirits, and imported deities from every land they conquered. They were warriors, builders, worshippers, schemers. And they carved their stories on tablets of clay, pressing wedges of cuneiform into wet earth, baking them into permanence. And yet, somehow, those stories fell silent. For nearly 3 millennia, not a soul could read their words. Not a single king's name remained in memory. To historians of the early modern age, they never existed. And so when the Bible mentioned them, the mysterious Hittites, living in Canaan, scholars assumed it must mean something else. A minor tribe, perhaps. A footnote. Certainly not a world-spanning empire. But the stones remembered. And they waited. Picture yourself walking deeper among the ruins. The stones of Hattusa are pale, almost silver in the fading light. The walls rise and fall across the hills in a great loop, nearly 6 kilometers long. Imagine them intact, fortifications so immense they swallowed the mountain itself. The gates are still there, the Lion Gate, its guardian beast glaring, the King's Gate, with a weathered warrior carved in relief, the Sphinx Gate, where eerie figures with human faces and animal bodies watched those who passed. Now picture the city alive. Streets filled with merchants. Chariots rattling over the cobbles. Priests carrying offerings to a temple courtyard that smelled of incense and roasting meat. In the great palace, scribes scratching lines into clay tablets. Somewhere above them all, the great king seated on a throne of cedar, iron sword at his side, messengers rushing to and from foreign lands. And then silence. The Hittites disappeared around 1200 BC, part of the great wave of collapses that swept the Bronze Age. The Sea Peoples ravaged coasts. Earthquakes struck. famine-starved kingdoms. And in that maelstrom, the Hittite world was swallowed. For centuries afterward, travelers passed their ruins without knowing. Villagers plundered their stones to build homes. Shepherds let flocks graze in the shadow of their fallen gates. And the empire became nothing more than a riddle, a vanished power, erased from memory. But the ground beneath still held their secrets. Thousands upon thousands of clay tablets, buried and waiting. Imagine holding one in your hand. It is small, heavy, warm from the sun. Across its surface are wedge-shaped signs, tiny strokes pressed into clay with a reed stylus. At first glance it seems meaningless, a jumble of marks. But in truth it is a voice 3,000 years old. It might be a royal decree, a myth about the storm god, a record of war, or perhaps a treaty with Egypt, written in lines that once brought peace to the bloodiest battlefield the ancient world had seen. Those voices waited, silent, until the 19th century, when curious travelers and archaeologists began to dig among the Anatolian hills. They unearthed tablets, statues, seals, and slowly, piece by piece, the shadow of a forgotten empire returned. But that rediscovery belongs to another part of our journey. For now, stand here, at the Lion Gate. Feel the weight of silence pressing against the stones. Listen to the whisper of the wind through the mountains. And know this, the empire that once ruled from these heights was as great as Egypt, as mighty as Babylon, as ruthless as Assyria. Yet it was swallowed whole by time, until only ruins remained. And so the question begins to form: who were they? What did they believe? How did they live, love, and fight? And why, when the dust settled, did the Hittites vanish so completely? The answers begin not in the ruins themselves, but in the rediscovery, a story of scholars, explorers, and the patient earth finally giving up its secrets. The wind sighs once more through the stones of Hattusa, and as you brush the dust from your hands, the silence of the ruins lingers like a question. Who built this? Who lived here? For thousands of years, no one could answer. The empire had died, the world had moved on, and the memory of the Hittites dissolved into nothing. But time has a strange sense of patience. What is buried waits. And in the 19th century, the earth itself began to speak again. Imagine the scene. Europe is restless, brimming with curiosity. Steamships slice across seas, railways thunder over plains, and scholars and adventurers fan out across the ancient world with notebooks, shovels, and egos as large as the ruins they hope to claim. Egypt is revealing its mummies. Mesopotamia yields its winged bulls and tablets. And somewhere in the backwater hills of Anatolia, whispers begin of ruins no one can name. At first, they are only curiosities, scattered lion statues, reliefs of warriors in strange headdresses, walls half swallowed by earth. Travelers record them in sketches and diaries, but no one knows what to make of them. Some insist they must be remnants of Assyria. Others argue they are Phrygian, or perhaps the work of Greeks before their time. The stones keep their silence. But then come the tablets. It begins with explorers stumbling upon inscribed clay fragments near the village of Bagazkoy in central Anatolia. At first glance, the marks look like Babylonian cuneiform, the wedge-shaped script already being studied from Mesopotamia. Yet something is off. Some tablets are written in clear Akkadian, the diplomatic language of the ancient Near East, but others contain a script no one can read, lines of symbols that make no sense. Scholars blink at them, frown, and move on. But the mystery lingers. By the mid-19th century, whispers turn to obsession. Archaeologists begin to realize that Anatolia is not a blank space on the map of antiquity. It is a buried world of its own. Among the mountains lie fortresses, temples, and libraries of clay, sealed away for 3,000 years. Imagine yourself in that moment of discovery, kneeling in the dust, holding a tablet just pulled from the soil. Your fingers trace the grooves of cuneiform, still sharp though centuries have passed. You squint at the symbols, knowing they are words, voices, entire stories pressed into clay by hands long dead. But you cannot read them. Not yet. All you can feel is the weight of a mystery pressing against your palms. The scholars of Europe are electrified. Here is evidence of a people no one remembers. A lost empire, hidden in plain sight. In 1880, an archaeologist named William Wright proposed something audacious: that the biblical Hittites, dismissed by scholars as a minor tribe, were in fact the builders of these vast Anatolian ruins. At first, his claim was ridiculed. Surely a people so mighty, so organized, could not have been erased from memory. Surely the Bible exaggerated. But Wright was not alone. Others began to see patterns in the ruins, hints of a great power once standing astride the crossroads of Asia and the Mediterranean. The lion gates, the Sphinx statues, the walls that stretched for miles. This was no tribe. This was an empire. And then, in 1906, the silence finally cracked open. Picture it, German archaeologists, led by Hugo Winkler, digging at Bagaskoy. Their spades strike clay. Tablet after tablet emerges from the earth, until there are thousands, so many that crates are filled and shipped by the ton. Whole archives had been buried, waiting. And as scholars pore over them, one truth becomes clear: this was a capital city. Bagaskoy is not just a village with ruins. It is Hattusa, the seat of kings who once rivaled Egypt. The rediscovery is intoxicating. Suddenly, history must be rewritten. Egypt did not stand alone. Mesopotamia was not unrivaled. There had been another great power, a power erased by time, now roaring back through clay and stone. The deciphering of the tablets becomes an epic in itself. Some are in Akkadian, and thus understandable, but many are written in a language no one recognizes. Scholars dub it Hittite, though they do not yet know what that means. For years the tablets mock them, silent despite their visible words. It is like staring at a locked chest, knowing treasures lie within but having no key. Then, in 1915, a Czech linguist named Bedřich Hrozný holds one of these tablets, and notices something strange. Among the cuneiform lines, he sees words that look familiar, eerily familiar. One of them reads, Nu ninden ezatini water ma akatini. At first it seems nonsense. But Hrozný has an idea. Ninda, he recalls, is the Sumerian logogram for bread. Ezatini, he thinks, resembles a word for to eat. Water, could it be water? Suddenly, the line blossoms into meaning. Now you will eat bread and drink water. In that moment, the Hittites speak again. It is a revelation. Hrozný has discovered that the Hittite language belongs to the Indo-European family, the same vast linguistic tree that gave rise to Latin, Greek, Sanskrit, and eventually English. The voices of the Hittites are not so alien after all. They are kin. Their words echo faintly in the languages we speak today. The tablets begin to yield. Kings and queens emerge from the dust. Treaties, myths, laws, prayers, and prophecies take shape. The empire rises again, not in stone, but in words. Imagine reading, for the first time in 3 millennia, the anxieties of a Hittite king who fears rebellion, or the devotion of a priest begging the storm god for mercy, or the precision of a scribe recording the terms of peace with Egypt. Each tablet is a voice, fragile yet defiant, whispering across time, "We were here." The rediscovery sends ripples across the scholarly world. Egypt is no longer the unrivaled titan of the late Bronze Age. Mesopotamia no longer stands alone in its glory. A third power, the Hittites, joins them in the pantheon of ancient empires. And yet, the strangest part is how thoroughly they had been forgotten. How does an empire that stretched across Anatolia and Syria, that fought Egypt to a standstill, that mastered iron, vanish so completely? How could no memory of them survive except as a vague biblical echo? That question hangs in the air as archaeologists press deeper into Hattusa's ruins. They uncovered temples with altars still blackened by sacrifice, palaces with storerooms packed with broken jars, walls that snake endlessly over the hills. They find not just tablets but seals, statues, carvings. And everywhere, the recurring faces of gods, a pantheon so immense it seems to absorb every deity the Hittites encountered. Slowly, a picture begins to form, a people pragmatic and ruthless, absorbing cultures into their own, yet bound by a sense of divine obligation. Their kings called themselves "My Son," radiant but fragile, forever dependent on the favor of gods. Their laws echo with practicality and cruelty in equal measure. Their armies were built not just on chariots, but on iron weapons few others possessed. The Hittites emerged from silence not as a mere footnote, but as a civilization that once stood at the very center of the world. You and I, standing here in the ruins, can almost see it. The archaeologists of the 19th century, sweat on their brows, prying clay from the earth. The scholars in smoky European studies, hunched over tablets, struggling to pull meaning from marks. The thrill of Hrosny's realization, bread and water, proof that the Hittites were not lost forever. It is as though the empire itself chose to remain silent until humanity was ready to listen again. And listen we did. As the rediscovery spread, it captured not only scholars but the public imagination. Newspapers announced the resurrection of a forgotten empire. Museums clamored for artifacts. And slowly, the Hittites stepped back into their place in human history. But rediscovery is never just about ruins or tablets. It is about reanimation, the bringing back of lives, fears, and ambitions once thought buried forever. To know the Hittites is to walk their streets again, to hear the prayers murmured in their temples, to feel the ground tremble beneath their chariots. And so, as the 20th century dawned, the question was no longer whether the Hittites existed. It was, who were they? What world did they build? And how had they shaped the story of humanity, even in silence? The answer lies just ahead, in the heart of their capital, Hattusa, a fortress carved into the mountains. Shall we step inside its gates? The tablets are laid out before us, their cuneiform grooves catching the lamplight in a scholar's study. "Bread, water," whispers Hrosny, realizing the voices of the Hittites can be heard again. And yet, words on clay only whet the hunger. To truly know them, we must walk where they walked, breathe the air of their capital, and feel the weight of the stones they raised. So let us leave the study behind. The dust of Anatolia clings to our sandals as we climb. Ahead, rising from the plateau like the bones of the earth, lies Hattusa, the city that once ruled the world. The journey to Hattusa begins with silence. Not the soft silence of a library, but the vast, breathless quiet of highlands. Central Anatolia stretches out in rolling hills, a patchwork of rock, oak scrub, and barren earth. The wind is constant, brushing the grasses flat, carrying the cry of hawks circling above. Imagine approaching this place 3,000 years ago. You are a merchant from Syria, perhaps, or an emissary from Egypt, traveling with a small retinue of guards and servants. The road winds upward, each turn revealing higher walls, darker shadows. And then, at last, you see them, the ramparts of Hattusa. 6 kilometers of stone, snaking like a serpent across the ridges, bristling with towers and gates. The scale alone staggers you. This is not a city built merely for comfort. It is a fortress, hewn from the mountain itself, designed to intimidate all who approach. Even in ruin, the walls inspire awe. Imagine them intact, 15 meters high, double thickness in places, topped with parapets where guards once paced. Every gate is a statement. The Lion Gate, its guardians carved from single blocks of stone, jaws open in eternal roar. The King's Gate, with a warrior etched deep into the rock, spear in hand. The Sphinx Gate, where eerie hybrid creatures watched with unblinking eyes. Passing through these was no casual act. It was an initiation. The city demanded submission before you even entered. Step through with me. Feel the shadow of the stone lions fall across your back. The air cools. Suddenly you are inside Hattusa. The first impression is not comfort but scale. Streets climb steeply upward, twisting with the terrain, flanked by massive walls. Terraces rise one above another, each crowned with temples and palaces. The city is built less like a grid, more like a labyrinth, a mirror of the mountains themselves. This is not a place that welcomes. It overwhelms. At the lower levels sprawls the great temple, the beating heart of the city's faith. Imagine a vast courtyard where hundreds of worshippers once gathered, the smell of incense heavy in the air. Priests in long robes lead oxen to sacrifice. The cries of the animals echo against the walls. Blood spills into stone channels cut for the purpose, darkening the altar. The storm god of Hutti and the sun goddess of Arena are invoked with chants that rise into the night. Surrounding the temple are storerooms, their walls stacked with jars of grain, oil, and wine. This is not merely a place of worship, it is the empire's treasury, its granary, its pulse. To control the temple is to control the flow of food and offerings, and thus to control the people. Beyond the temple rises the palace, perched high upon Baikal, the citadel rock. Its walls crown the ridge like a clenched fist. This is where the great king resided, lord of the land of Hutti, brother to Pharaoh, equal to Babylon's rulers. From here, he looked down upon his city, secure behind gates and walls. Let us wander further, into the streets. They are alive with sound. Blacksmiths hammer iron into blades, the clang ringing like bells. Chariots rattle over cobblestones, drawn by snorting horses imported from the plains. Scribes hurry with tablets, tucked carefully into leather satchels. Women carry baskets of bread from communal ovens, the scent of baking mingling with smoke from hearths. Children chase each other through alleys, laughing, their shouts carrying up to the terraces. Soldiers patrol, bronze helmets glinting, spears tapping against stone. Everywhere, the sense of order and tension. This is a city always on guard, aware of its enemies, aware of its gods, aware that its strength is both its pride and its burden. And listen, beneath the bustle lies something else. A hum of fear, perhaps, or reverence. For in Hattusa, everything is watched. The gods are many, 1,000 and more, their eyes in every statue and relief. To live here is to live under their gaze, never certain which spirit might be pleased, which angered. Now pause with me. Imagine the seasons shifting over this city. In summer, the heat radiates from the stones. Dust fills the air, clinging to robes and hair. The fields beyond the walls shimmer with golden wheat, but inside, water is precious. Cisterns and channels carry it carefully, guarded by the temple. In winter, snow blankets the mountains. The wind howls through every crack in the gates. Fires burn in hearths, but the cold presses in relentlessly, seeping into stone floors. The walls, so strong against enemies, are useless against frost. Yet still, the city endures, its people wrapped in wool, huddling in shared warmth. Through it all, Hattusa stands. Not just a city, but a fortress of faith and power. What must it have been like, to climb the citadel steps and enter the palace? Picture it, a hall lined with reliefs, flickering torches casting shadows that make lions and warriors dance upon the walls. At the far end, a throne upon a dais. The great king sits, wearing a tall, conical crown, an iron sword laid across his lap. Around him, courtiers bow low, ambassadors present gifts, gold from Egypt, horses from Mitanni, tribute from vassals who dare not defy him. But look closer. See the weariness in his eyes. For to rule from Hattusa is to live under constant strain. The city is magnificent, yes, but isolated. Enemies press from every side, Egypt to the south, Assyria to the east, restless tribes in the mountains. And within, always, the gods demand more. More sacrifices, more rituals, more obedience. The throne may glitter, but it rests on fragile stone. As archaeologists uncovered these ruins, they realized something remarkable. Hattusa was not built simply to be lived in. It was a performance of power. Its walls shouted strength. Its gates demanded awe. Its palaces whispered authority. To walk through it was to be reminded, every moment, of who ruled, and by what divine sanction. And yet, even in all its grandeur, the city reveals its humanity. Look at the scribal archives, thousands of tablets stacked neatly in storerooms. They record not just treaties and decrees, but the daily rhythms of life, disputes over land, inventories of grain, instructions for rituals, even medical prescriptions. Here, in these lines, we glimpse the heartbeat of a society, practical, meticulous, sometimes anxious. One tablet lists omens, the flight of birds, the pattern of smoke, the shape of a lamb's liver examined in sacrifice. Each sign weighed, each meaning debated. For the Hittites, the world was alive with messages. Every crack in the earth, every strange dream, every shadow at twilight could be the gods speaking. To live in Hattusa was to live in constant negotiation with fate. Let us step back for a moment, out of the palace and through the gates, to look upon the city as the sun sets. The walls glow red, the stones catching fire in the dying light. Beyond, the Anatolian plateau stretches into shadow. The air cools. The voices of the city fade to murmurs. You can almost believe, in this moment, that the stones remember. That the lions still guard, that the gates still open for kings, that the prayers still rise into the night. For though the empire has fallen, Hattusa remains. Its ruins are not silent, they are a chorus, if you know how to listen. And as the torches flicker along the citadel walls, we move onward, deeper into the Hittite world. Ahead lies not just the fortress, but the laws that governed it, the codes that bound king and subject alike. Shall we walk into the courts of justice, where the Hittites inscribed their vision of order in clay? The gates of Hattusa close behind us with a rumble of stone, and we find ourselves in the shadow of another kind of fortress, not of walls and lions, but of words. For if the Hittites built their capital in the mountains to guard against the world, they built their laws to guard against themselves. Picture a clay tablet laid carefully on a wooden desk, its surface wet, ready for the stylus. The scribe leans close, pressing wedges into the clay with practiced precision. What he records is not myth, nor prayer, but judgment, the will of the king, the rules of the realm. Here, in lines of cuneiform, the Hittite world defines itself: crime, punishment, mercy, and the limits of power. And what a strange balance it strikes. Most ancient codes we know, Hammurabi's Babylonian stele, for instance, read like a litany of cruelty. If a man breaks another man's bone, let his own bone be broken. If he blinds another, let him be blinded. Justice by retaliation, eye for eye, blood for blood. Brutal symmetry. The Hittites knew this model. They could have followed it. And yet, when we read their laws, something different emerges. Less savage, though no less harsh. Pragmatic, almost weary, as if they had seen too much blood already and preferred fines, labor, or restitution instead of endless cycles of vengeance. Imagine yourself accused before a Hittite judge. Perhaps you quarreled with a neighbor, your ox strayed into his field, or your hand was caught stealing grain from a storehouse. You fear mutilation or death, but the verdict surprises you. The judge orders not your hand cut off, not your life taken, but that you pay compensation, so many shekels of silver, or an animal from your herd. To us, it might seem still severe. To the ancient world, it was merciful. Where Babylon demanded blood, the Hittites often demanded payment. But mercy had limits. Theft of livestock might be compensated. Breaking another man's bones might be settled with silver. But crimes that threatened the gods, those were another matter. If you desecrated a temple, ignored ritual obligations, or swore falsely by a deity's name, your punishment was swift and severe. The Hittite world ran on divine contracts. Every oath was sworn in the sight of 1,000 gods. To break one was not just treachery against man, but rebellion against heaven itself. And the penalty could be death. Imagine standing in a temple courtyard, accused of violating a sacred vow. Priests gather, their faces stern. A bull is sacrificed, its entrails examined for signs of guilt. The crowd waits in silence, the smell of blood and incense heavy in the air. If the omens condemn you, your fate is sealed. You are led away, perhaps to execution, perhaps to exile, cast out from the community into the cold wilderness. Yet even in severity, the Hittites showed peculiar logic. Consider their laws on animals. If your pig destroyed a man's crops, you owed him restitution. If your dog bit someone, you compensated the injury. These were not abstract rules. They were practical solutions for a people who lived close to their animals, their fields, their survival. Or take their laws on sexual crimes. In some cases, where Babylon or Assyria might have executed both parties, the Hittites judged by context. Consent mattered in a way that startles modern assumptions about the Bronze Age. The woman's word carried weight. If she resisted, the man was punished. If she did not, sometimes both were spared. Still harsh, still patriarchal, but complex in its reasoning, a recognition, however limited, of shades of truth. One tablet lists penalties with chilling matter-of-factness. If a man steals a sheep, he shall pay 4 sheep. If he steals a pig, he shall pay 10 pigs. If he steals a beehive, he shall pay 10 hives. The logic seems clear enough. Livestock was livelihood, theft an attack on survival. But read further, and the code reveals its darker edge. If anyone has intercourse with a pig or a dog, he shall die. If a man has intercourse with a horse or mule, it is not an offense. Strange, unsettling rules, where taboos were drawn in lines that made sense only to Hittite minds. Here we see a society balancing between pragmatism and superstition, between order and the shadows of fear. Picture a courtroom in Hattusa. The judge sits on a low bench, scribes at his side, recording every word. The accused stands barefoot on stone, flanked by guards. Witnesses are called. Oaths are sworn before the gods. If the case is complex, omens may be sought, the flight of birds, the pattern of oil and water, the cracks in heated bone. And when judgment falls, it is written down, pressed into clay, archived in the palace. The Hittites did not leave justice to rumor. They documented it, stored it, preserved it, as if order itself depended on memory. But law was not merely courtroom drama. It bled into daily life, shaping everything from marriage to property. Marriage contracts detailed dowries, rights, obligations. Divorce was allowed, but costly. A man could set aside his wife, but he owed her support. A woman could leave her husband in certain cases, though the risks were greater. Even here, practicality overruled dogma. Inheritance too was codified. Sons took precedence, but daughters were not excluded. Widows had claims. The law bent to ensure continuity of households, fields, and offerings to ancestors. For a society that feared disorder above all, keeping families intact was as vital as guarding walls. And hovering always above these rules was the figure of the king. The great king was no distant monarch, issuing decrees and vanishing into luxury. He was the fountain of justice, the ultimate judge. Appeals could rise to his court. His word could overrule others. Yet even he was bound, not by men, but by gods. To render judgment falsely, to let corruption taint the law, was to invite divine wrath. Kings themselves could be toppled, struck down by plague or rebellion, if they strayed too far. Thus the laws were more than tools of governance. They were a covenant between people, king, and gods, a fragile triangle of power and faith. Imagine being a peasant in the fields, your livelihood one sick ox away from ruin. The law protects you, fines for theft, compensation for damage. But it also binds you. failed to offer the proper sacrifices, failed to honor an oath, and the same law condemns you. Or imagine being a noble, standing in the palace court. The laws bind you too. Even the king's sons were not immune. History tells of princes tried for conspiracy, their fates sealed not by whim but by decree. The Hittite laws, then, are less about fairness in our sense and more about balance. They kept society from fracturing, kept vengeance from spiraling, kept the gods appeased. In their stern pragmatism, they reflect a world always on the brink, a world where survival depended on order, and order on obedience. Walk with me now, out of the courtroom and into the archives. The air is dry, the shelves stacked high with clay. Each tablet bears its case, its verdict, its punishment. Thousands of small echoes, each one a reminder. The empire lived not just by sword and chariot, but by law. You run your fingers across one tablet, still cool to the touch despite 3,000 years in the earth. You can almost hear the scribe's stylus tapping as he pressed the words. If a man blinds another man, he shall pay 20 shekels of silver. Not vengeance. Not mutilation. Payment. Balance. Order. This was the Hittite way. Yet even order has shadows. For what are laws but reflections of power? Behind every fine, every punishment, lies the weight of the state. Behind every oath, the eyes of the gods. To disobey was to invite ruin, not only from men, but from heaven itself. And so, in Hattusa, law was both shield and sword. Shield against chaos, sword against those who threatened the fragile weave of the empire. We step back into the streets of the city now, leaving the archives behind. The clang of blacksmiths, the murmur of priests, the distant rumble of chariots fills the air again. But as you walk, you carry with you the sense of those laws, etched deep like grooves in stone, shaping every life. For the Hittites were not remembered for mercy. They were remembered for survival. And in their survival, the law was everything. Ahead, beyond the streets, beyond the palace and the temple, another sound begins to rise, chants, drums, the echo of horns. A procession winds its way toward the high places, where sacrifices are made and gods invoked. If the law bound the people to each other, ritual bound them to the heavens. And the Hittites, more than most, lived in the company of 1,000 gods. Shall we follow the procession now into the pantheon of the Hittites, where stone and sky trembled with their prayers? The courtroom fades. The clay tablets cool in their shelves. Outside, in the winding streets of Hattusa, a drumbeat rises. It comes from the temple quarter, a low, rhythmic pulse that grows as you draw near. Priests chant, their voices layering like waves. The smell of incense drifts on the air, sharp and sweet, mingling with the musk of animals led for sacrifice. The Hittites, you soon realize, lived not under the shadow of one god, nor even a small family of gods, but beneath a crowd, a divine throng so vast it earned them a reputation, the people of 1,000 gods. Imagine stepping into the great temple of Hattusa. Its walls tower above, plain stone outside but within alive with ritual. Courtyards stretch wide, designed to hold not just priests but whole companies of worshippers. Storerooms line the halls, packed with jars of grain, wine, oil, offerings both sacred and practical, for temples were as much treasuries as sanctuaries. At the heart of it stands the altar, blackened by generations of fire. Here oxen bellow, their throats cut, blood coursing into carved channels. Here priests lift their hands, chanting invocations to the storm god of Hutti, to the sun goddess of Arina, to the deities of rivers, mountains, skies. The smell is heavy blood, smoke, wine splashed upon stone. But do not imagine uniformity. Each god had its own rituals, its own festivals, its own priests. And there were so very many. Why so many? Partly, the Hittites absorbed as they conquered. March into a new land, seize its city, and you adopt its gods too. Not merely as trophies, but as allies. To ignore them would be dangerous. What if the local storm god grew angry? Better to honor him, give him offerings, add him to the pantheon. And so the Hittite religion grew, sprawling, tangled, an endless procession of names and faces. There was the storm god of Nerik, the storm god of Aleppo, the storm god of Zippalanda. Each with his own personality, his own shrine. There was the sun goddess of Arena, bright and commanding, the queen of heaven. There were underworld deities, shadowy and cold, who demanded darker rites. Even foreign goddesses like Ishtar of Mesopotamia found their place, striding into Hittite rituals with her aura of love and war. The Hittites rarely discarded a god. They layered them, one upon another, until their pantheon became less a hierarchy and more a marketplace, noisy, crowded, impossible to ignore. Picture a festival day. The city hums with preparation. Bakers produce bread not for people but for gods, loaves shaped and stacked in careful patterns. Brewers prepare vats of beer, destined not for taverns but for temple feasts. Musicians tune lyres and flutes. At dawn, the king himself emerges, clad in ceremonial robes, his crown gleaming. For in Hutti, the king was not only ruler, he was high priest, mediator between earth and heaven. His presence was required, his prayers essential. Without him, the gods might not listen. He leads the procession. Behind him, priests carry statues of gods upon litters, veiled but heavy, swaying as they move. The people follow, singing, clapping, filling the streets with noise. The statues are carried from one temple to another, or even out into fields, for the gods must see the land they bless. They must walk among the people they rule. It is not solemn. It is exuberant. Imagine drums pounding, horns blaring, crowds pressing close to catch sight of their divine protectors. Offerings pile high, bread, honey, wine, sheep, oxen. At night, the feasting continues, for the gods eat by smoke and savor, while the people share what remains. A festival was both worship and survival, binding community and divinity in one roaring celebration. But not all rituals were joyous. Some were grim, born of fear. When plague struck, the king's prayers grow frantic. Clay tablets record his pleas. O gods, why have you brought this upon us? Have I failed in sacrifice? Have I broken an oath? The priests scour records, searching for forgotten vows, neglected shrines. Rituals are performed to appease the angered deity. Animals are slaughtered, their livers red for omens. If the plague persists, suspicion grows darker. Perhaps the gods demand human life. Yes, among the thousands of rituals recorded, there are whispers of human sacrifice. Rare, exceptional, but real. In times of dire need, captives or condemned criminals may have been offered, their blood spilled as last resort. To the Hittite mind, it was not cruelty but necessity, a grim bargaining with powers too vast to ignore. The pantheon itself was not static. Gods could merge, split, rise, or fade. One storm god might be identified with another. Local deities could be folded into great ones. It was a kaleidoscope, shifting with politics and conquest. Even the underworld gods, grim, faceless, held sway. Rituals for the dead were meticulous, ensuring spirits did not wander angry. Funerary rites included offerings, feasts, libations poured into the earth. To neglect the dead was to invite their wrath, and so the Hittite religion bound the living not just to heaven but to shadow. Let us pause here, in the temple's inner sanctum. The chamber is dim, lit by oil lamps that flicker against carved stone. A statue of the storm god looms, bronze eyes glinting in the half-light. Before him lies a table piled with bread, meat, and libations. Priests bow low, murmuring prayers. The air is thick, hard to breathe. You feel it, the weight of belief. Not abstract theology, but raw presence. For the Hittites, the gods were not distant ideals. They were immediate, demanding, ever-present. A wrong turn of phrase in a ritual, a missed offering, could bring famine, plague, defeat. Every breath of daily life was entangled with divine expectation. And here lies the paradox of Hittite religion. Its abundance was its strength, and also its burden. Strength, because no people were excluded. Conquered subjects saw their gods honored, not destroyed. Foreign deities joined the chorus, their cults alive within Hutti. This gave the empire a kind of spiritual glue, binding diverse peoples into one system of worship. Burden, because the pantheon never ended. Every conquest brought more gods, more rituals, more obligations. The priests groaned under the weight of ceremonies. The king, already crushed by politics and war, was expected to perform endless rites. To neglect even one was dangerous. To honor them all was nearly impossible. Imagine the exhaustion of empire, mirrored in the exhaustion of religion. 1,000 gods, each clamoring for attention, each with its own feast day, its own priests, its own demands. And yet, the system endured. For centuries, the Hittites prayed, sacrificed, celebrated, and feared. Their pantheon grew like a great forest, tangled and sprawling, never cut down, only added to. Archaeologists today still trace its branches through tablets and reliefs. They see gods of mountains, rivers, skies. They read hymns to the sun goddess, invocations to the storm god. They find treaties sworn by the 1,000 gods of Hutti, invoked as witnesses to political promises. In these words, the divine remains as central to power as chariots and walls. We leave the temple now, stepping back into the open air. The procession has passed, the drums have faded, and smoke from sacrifices drifts into the twilight sky. The city hums with life, but beneath it all lies a constant hum, the sense that eyes watch from above, from below, from every direction. The Hittite Empire was not built merely on walls or weapons. It was built on this throng of gods, a spiritual weight that pressed upon every heart. But gods who demand so much are not easily appeased. And when the earth shook, or the harvest failed, or enemies pressed too hard, the rituals grew darker. For among the 1,000 gods, some hungered not for bread or wine, but for blood. Shall we step closer now, into the shadowed chambers where sacrifices were made, and where the line between worship and terror blurred? The festival smoke still lingers in the air as the crowds disperse, their laughter fading down Hattusa's streets. Behind them, priests remain in the courtyards, sweeping ashes, collecting bones, pouring out the last of the libations. The gods, for now, are satisfied. Bread has been baked, wine poured, oxen slaughtered. But satisfaction was always temporary. For the Hittites, the gods were unpredictable. One season they sent rain, the next they withheld it. One year they blessed armies, the next they turned their faces away. Rituals, prayers, offerings, all were attempts to coax, to appease, to bargain. And sometimes, when the omens darkened and disaster stalked the land, the gods seemed to demand more. Not bread, not wine, not even oxen, but blood. Imagine a time of plague. The king himself lies awake in his palace chamber, feverish, his body trembling. Outside, fires burn in the streets as families mourn the dead. The archives tell us such moments came, records of kings begging the gods to reveal their anger, of priests scrambling through old tablets to discover which vow had been broken, which ritual neglected. The normal offerings no longer suffice. Grain is poured upon altars. Sheep are sacrificed by the dozens. Still the sickness spreads. Desperation grows. And so, in hushed tones, the priests begin to whisper of older rites. Darker ones. Human life, offered as the final currency. Archaeological evidence is scarce, but the tablets hint at it, fragments describing the immolation of captives, the burial of humans beneath foundations, the sacrifice of prisoners to seal oaths. For the Hittites, human blood was not routine. It was last resort, a weapon of fear turned inward. But when the gods' wrath seemed unstoppable, they reached for it. Picture the ritual. Captives taken in war are led into the courtyard, their hands bound. Priests chant, circling with torches. The crowd watches in silence, knowing this is not vengeance but offering. The knife flashes, the cries rise, and blood spills across the altar stone, soaking into channels cut long before. Smoke curls upward, carrying the scent of burning flesh. Do the gods relent? No one knows. But the people leave the temple with the grim conviction that at least they have given all they could. Blood was not only for crisis. It was woven into the fabric of worship. Animal sacrifice was constant, a daily dialogue between people and gods. Sheep, goats, cattle, each killed with ceremony, their blood caught in bowls, their bodies burned or shared in sacred feasts. Even the smallest rituals called for it. Before journeys, before treaties, before planting crops, animals were slain to bind the act with divine witness. To cut without sacrifice was to act without permission. The killing itself was ritualized. The animal was led to the altar, washed, adorned with ribbons, prayed over. The knife was swift, the blood deliberate. The liver was examined, cracks, spots, textures read like words, messages from the gods. The entrails, once examined, were burned, their smoke a signal to heaven. It was not cruelty for cruelty's sake. To the Hittites, it was conversation. The gods spoke in omens, and men replied in blood. There were stranger rites still, where blood was less about death and more about transformation. Some texts describe priests smearing blood on altars, even on participants, a marking, a way of binding human and divine. Others speak of substitutive sacrifices, a goat or dog symbolically carrying away human sin, slaughtered so that the people might live free of guilt. In one ritual, a person touched by impurity, perhaps by touching a corpse or breaking a taboo, was symbolically transferred into an animal, which was then killed or sent into the wilderness. The human walked away cleansed, their burden carried off in blood. It was messy, unsettling, but deeply pragmatic, a ritual technology for survival in a world where gods were always watching. Consider also the role of oaths. When the Hittites swore treaties, they did so before the 1,000 gods, invoking blessings for fidelity and curses for betrayal. And those curses were vivid. If you break this oath, the tablets record, may your blood pour out like this wine, may your body be cut apart like this animal. To seal the words, animals were sacrificed, their carcasses split, their blood spilled. The act was theater as much as devotion, a warning carved into memory. Any who thought of breaking their vows could remember the stench of blood, the sight of entrails steaming on stone, and know the gods would do the same to them. But perhaps the darkest use of sacrifice lay in foundation rituals. When new buildings were raised, palaces, temples, fortifications, they were sometimes consecrated with life. Archaeologists debate the evidence, but legends and scattered records speak of humans buried beneath walls, their blood mingling with stone, their spirits bound to guard the structure. Imagine the Lion Gate of Hattusa. Did it stand upon such a sacrifice? Did the great lions, carved with eternal snarls, receive their power from human blood poured at their feet? We cannot know for certain. But the possibility lingers, haunting the stones. For all this grimness, we must not imagine the Hittites as ghouls. To them, blood was not horror but necessity, the currency of existence. Every life depended on sacrifice, whether in field or temple. Crops grew because blood was given. Armies triumphed because blood sealed oaths. Cities stood because blood consecrated their stones. And sometimes, blood was beauty. Festivals often ended with communal feasts of the sacrificed animals, music playing, wine flowing, children dancing. The gods were fed by smoke, the people by flesh, both joined in one cycle of offering and return. Sacrifice was not only fear, but celebration, a reminder that gods and men shared the same table, if only for a moment. Yet we cannot escape the shadow. Human blood was rare, but it was real. And in those moments, We see the Hittite world at its most fragile, terrified of divine anger, desperate for survival, willing to give even human life to tip the balance. Step into the temple's darkest chamber with me. The air is heavy, almost suffocating. A pit has been dug, a torch guttering above it. At its edge stands the priest, knife in hand. A captive kneels, eyes closed. The chant rises, the blade falls, and the earth drinks. For the Hittites, this was not murder. It was covenant. Not cruelty, but contract. The gods demanded, and men answered. And so, in the rhythm of daily life, blood pulsed through the empire. From the grand feasts of the storm god to the hidden sacrifices of plague years, it bound the people to their gods, their king, their very survival. The walls of Hattusa may have crumbled. The tablets may lie shattered. But somewhere in the soil, traces of that blood remain, offerings made to keep 1,000 gods appeased, 1,000 dangers at bay. We step back now from the altar, our hands still smelling of smoke and iron, our ears filled with chants that will not fade. Outside, the clang of metal rings louder. For while the Hittites gave blood to their gods, they also forged power in fire. Iron, darker and stronger than bronze, was their secret weapon. Shall we leave the temple's shadows and follow the sparks of the forge, where the masters of iron hammered out the empire's fate? The chants fade. The altar lies behind us, blackened with soot, sticky with dried blood. Yet ahead, a different fire blazes. It is the fire of the forge, a place not of sacrifice, but of transformation. Follow the sound. It begins as a distant ringing, a steady rhythm like a heartbeat. Closer now, and the clang becomes sharper, echoing against stone. Then you see it, a smithy in Hattusa, its doorway glowing orange, smoke curling upward, sparks bursting into the night. Inside, men work with bare arms slicked in sweat, their muscles taut as they swing hammers against glowing metal. Iron. The word seems simple. But in the 14th century BC, it was close to sorcery. Bronze had ruled the world for centuries, an alloy of copper and tin, beautiful, strong, but brittle against the march of time. Iron, by contrast, was something different. Harder. Sharper. Rarer. The Hittites, more than any other people of their age, learned to coax it from stone. And in doing so, they changed history. Imagine the process. Ore is dug from the mountains, heavy and unyielding, black veins pulled from the earth like the bones of giants. It is not copper, soft and pliable. It is stubborn, locked inside stone. To free it requires heat, more heat than ordinary fires can provide. The smith builds his furnace, feeds it with charcoal, pumps bellows until the flames roar white-hot. Inside, the ore begins to yield, its heart softening. Not liquid like bronze, but spongy, resistant. The smith pulls it out with tongs, places it on the anvil. Sparks fly. The hammer falls again and again, beating the metal, shaping it, driving out the slag. Slowly, painfully, iron takes form. A knife. A spearhead. A chisel. Simple, but stronger than bronze, less likely to shatter, more likely to pierce. In the Hittite world, such weapons were not common. They were precious, guarded secrets of the state. To possess iron was to hold a fragment of power itself. Step into a Hittite armory. The racks are filled with bronze, helmets, shields, swords, gleaming in the torchlight. But in a corner, kept separate, lie iron blades. Darker, heavier, less polished, yet far more fearsome. These are the treasures of the empire, the edge that made their armies formidable. Picture a battle. Two lines of soldiers clash, bronze swords ringing against shields. Suddenly, a Hittite warrior thrusts with an iron spearhead. The bronze bends, the iron holds. The enemy falters. Fear spreads. Word goes out, the men of Hutti wield weapons from the bones of the earth, weapons no others possess. It is as much terror as technology. Iron becomes legend. The Hittites are whispered about not only as conquerors, but as sorcerers of metal. Yet iron was not just for war. It was a symbol. Kings exchanged iron daggers as gifts, tokens of friendship or intimidation. Priests consecrated iron objects, using them in rituals where permanence was demanded. A treaty sealed with an iron blade carried weight beyond words. Even in myth, iron gleams. In one Hittite ritual text, an iron sickle is used to separate heaven and earth in a symbolic reenactment of creation. Iron was not merely material, it was cosmic. But secrecy clung to it. The knowledge of smelting and forging was guarded, perhaps limited to state workshops. Few outside the heartland of Hutti could produce it. For centuries, the wider world still relied on bronze, while the Hittites held iron close. Consider how rare it was. Archaeologists have found only a handful of iron artifacts from the late Bronze Age, and most are ceremonial: daggers, pins, small blades. They were not yet mass-produced tools of peasants or merchants. They were treasures, luxuries, often reserved for elites. One famous piece is the iron dagger buried with Tutankhamun in Egypt. Its blade gleams still, fashioned not of earthly ore but of meteorite iron, literally a fragment of the heavens. Whether a Hittite smith forged it remains debated, but the connection is telling. Even Egypt, with all its grandeur, looked to Hutti for the secrets of iron. Now imagine standing in a forge as a Hittite smith raises a half-finished blade. The fire glows red on his face, his hammer falling in measured rhythm. Each strike is more than labor, it is ritual, patience made visible. You smell the smoke, hear the hiss as hot metal meets water. You see the blade, dark and sharp, held up against the light. This is not just a weapon. It is proof of mastery over nature itself. The mountains yield their hidden bones, and men shape them into instruments of will. Iron gave the Hittites an edge, but it was never absolute. Bronze still dominated. Most soldiers carried bronze swords, most tools were bronze or stone. Iron was expensive, difficult, limited. Yet in its promise, its potential, it foreshadowed the future. The Iron Age loomed just beyond, waiting for those who could spread the craft further. And when the Hittite Empire fell, their iron secrets scattered. Others, Assyrians, Philistines, eventually all peoples of the Near East, would take them up. But in memory it was the Hittites who were first whispered as masters of iron. Think now of the symbolism. Blood on altars. Iron in forges. Both red, both hot, both binding men to powers greater than themselves. In sacrifice, blood bound men to gods. In iron, fire bound men to earth. The Hittites lived between the two, their empire hammered in blood and fire alike. And it was with these iron-forged weapons, consecrated by sacrifice, that their armies marched. Ahead of us now comes the thunder of wheels, the rattle of reins, the shouts of men. For if iron was the secret heart of Hittite strength, the chariot was its arm. Shall we follow the sound of hooves into the ranks of the Hittite army, where iron blades and wooden wheels carried them across battlefields? The forge door swings shut, sparks fading into the night. But the air outside is alive with another rhythm, the heavy clatter of hooves, the rattle of wheels, the shouted orders of men. We follow it down Hattusa's sloping streets until we reach the open plain beyond the walls. Here they gather, the army of the great king. Not a rabble, not a mob, but a machine of flesh and wood and bronze and iron. This is the fist of Hutti, the force that brought cities to their knees, that challenged Egypt, that spread terror from Anatolia to Syria. The ground shakes as chariots roll into formation, their wheels cutting grooves into the dirt. Horses snort, tossing their manes, their harnesses gleaming with bronze. Soldiers march behind, shields on their backs, spears upright like a forest of wood and iron. The air is thick with dust and tension. This is no festival. This is war. To understand the Hittite army, you must first understand the chariot. Imagine a vehicle of wood and hide, light yet sturdy, drawn by 2 or sometimes 3 horses. Its wheels spin fast, rimmed with bronze. Upon its platform stand not 1 but 3 men, a driver, a shield-bearer, and a warrior armed with spear or bow. This is the Hittite innovation. While Egyptian and Mycenaean chariots often carried 2, the Hittites packed 3, trading speed for power. Picture them charging. Dozens of chariots abreast, horses pounding, dust rising in a choking cloud. The first impact is chaos, spears thrusting, arrows loosed, shields raised to ward off counterblows. The extra man allows coordination, relentless assault. They smash into enemy ranks not like raindrops, but like thunderbolts, breaking formations, scattering foot soldiers in panic. To face the Hittite chariot was to face a moving fortress. Behind them marched the foot soldiers. Rows upon rows, disciplined, armored in bronze and leather, armed with spears, axes, and the rare iron blade. Their shields are large, hides stretched tight over wooden frames. Their helmets are crested, their cloaks heavy with dust. These are not mere conscripts. They are trained, organized, arranged in divisions loyal to their commanders. Each contingent is drawn from provinces, vassals, allies, a tapestry of peoples bound under the banner of the great king. Some march reluctantly, bound by treaties. Others march with pride, knowing victory brings plunder, slaves, and glory. The sound of their march is relentless, a drumbeat of sandals on earth, a chorus of voices chanting in rhythm, spears tapping in unison. At the heart of the army stands the king himself. The great king does not watch from afar. He rides with his troops, commanding in person, his chariot gleaming, his standard raised high. His presence is not symbolic, it is essential. For the army is bound not only by discipline but by loyalty to the king as priest, general, and guarantor of divine favor. Around him gather the generals, men of noble houses, veterans of campaigns. They command divisions, assign positions, ensure that supply lines flow. Behind them toil servants, cooks, smiths, chariot repairers, scribes recording rations and casualties. The Hittite army is not just warriors. It is an entire moving city, an empire on the march. War is hunger before it is blood. And the Hittites knew this. Their campaigns stretched across mountains and deserts, where food was scarce, water scarcer. Imagine a column of pack animals laden with grain, jars of wine, baskets of dried meat. Imagine wagons creaking under the weight of bronze-tipped spears, spare wheels, bundles of arrows. Every campaign required careful planning, depots established, fields stripped for fodder, vassals ordered to provide tribute. And when supply faltered, the army did not hesitate. They took. Cities were looted, villages stripped bare, captives chained and marched behind the lines. For the Hittite army did not march with charity. It marched with hunger, and hunger was merciless. We often imagine ancient armies as chaotic mobs, but the Hittites enforced strict discipline. Tablets record punishments for desertion, for cowardice, for theft from comrades. Soldiers were bound by oaths sworn before the 1,000 gods. To break those oaths was not just treason, it was sacrilege, punishable by death. And when the enemy resisted, the Hittites were ruthless. Cities that defied them were sacked, their leaders executed, their people enslaved. Captives filled Hattusa's streets, worked its fields, built its walls. The empire fed itself on conquest, and the army was its maw. Yet the Hittites also valued diplomacy. Just as often as they destroyed, they absorbed, sparing rulers who swore loyalty, incorporating foreign soldiers into their ranks. Their army was thus a mirror of their empire, brutal in conquest, pragmatic in governance. Close your eyes and stand with me on a Hittite battlefield. The plain stretches wide, the horizon shimmering in heat. On one side, the enemy waits, perhaps Egyptians with their own chariots, perhaps rebellious vassals with hastily gathered militias. On the other, the Hittites assemble. The horns blow. the ground trembles. Chariots surge forward, their wheels screaming, their horses frothing. Arrows darken the sky. Infantry advance behind, shields locked, spears thrusting. The noise is overwhelming, metal against metal, cries of pain, the thunder of hooves. Dust blinds you, blood splashes hot against your skin. For hours, the lines sway back and forth. Victory comes not from single duels, but from weight, the grinding pressure of formations, the repeated charges of chariots, the slow collapse of enemy will. And when the enemy breaks, the Hittites pursue without mercy. Captives are taken, cities burned, treaties rewritten in blood. This is not glory. It is survival. Every empire rests on power. For the Hittites, power wore armor, carried spears, and thundered on wheels. Their laws gave order, their gods gave sanction, but their army enforced both. Without it, treaties were empty, vassals restless, borders fragile. With it, they stood as equals to Egypt, Assyria, Babylon. With it, they carved an empire from Anatolia to Syria. With it, they marched to Kadesh, where the fate of the Near East trembled in the dust. Now, as the sun sinks over the plain, the soldiers lower their spears, the chariots roll back into camp. Fires are lit, meat roasted, wine passed around. The camp hums with weary laughter, with the clatter of dice, with the murmurs of men who have killed and survived another day. Somewhere, a scribe records rations, a priest offers prayers, a general sharpens his sword. The Hittite army sleeps, but its heart still beats, ready for the next march, the next battle, the next conquest. And ahead lies the greatest of them all, the clash at Kadesh, where Hittite and Egypt collided in thunder and blood, and where history's first peace treaty was written in the shadow of war. Shall we ride with them now, into the dust of Kadesh, where the chariots thunder louder than ever, and the fate of empires hangs in the balance? The Hittite camp stirs before dawn. Horses snort in the chill air, their breath steaming like smoke. Soldiers tighten straps, sharpen blades, check the lashings of their shields. Priests move among them, sprinkling water, murmuring prayers to the storm god, to the sun goddess, to the thousand deities who must witness the coming day. The great king, Muwaddali II, stands at the center of it all, tall beneath his plumed crown. He looks eastward, where the horizon glows faintly, and he knows that Pharaoh himself, Ramses II, waits beyond the river. The year is 1274 BC. The place, the city of Kadesh, on the Orontes River in Syria. And the world is about to shudder. For decades, Egypt and Hittite had been locked in a tug-of-war over Syria. The cities of the Levant were caught between them, switching allegiances like reeds in the wind. Each side sent emissaries, bribes, threats. Each side marched armies across deserts to enforce loyalty. Now, it has come to this. Ramses has led his forces north, determined to seize Kadesh once and for all. Muwaddali has marched south, equally determined to hold it. Two superpowers. Two kings who called themselves great. Two armies, each tens of thousands strong. The gods themselves must have leaned forward to watch. Imagine the Egyptian army on the march. Ramses, young and fiery, rides at the head of his chariot, his golden armor gleaming in the sun. Behind him trail 4 divisions, each named for a god, Ammonius, Ra-Ta-Set. But Ramses is overconfident. He pushes ahead with only the Ammonius division near him, the others lagging behind. Scouts bring word, false word, planted by Hittite trickery, that the Hittite army is far away, days off. Believing it, Ramses pitches camp near Kadesh, his men relaxed, their guard lowered. They do not know that beyond the river, hidden behind the city walls, the Hittite army waits in silence. Muwaddali's plan is bold, almost reckless. He has concealed over 3,000 chariots and tens of thousands of infantry. At his signal, they surge forward, thundering across the plain. Picture it, the ground trembling, a storm of hooves and wheels, dust rising like a curtain. The Egyptian Ammonius division scatters in panic. Chariots smash through tents, soldiers cut down before they can even raise shields. The camp erupts in chaos, horses screaming, men trampled, fires spreading. Ramses himself barely escapes. His chariot swerves, his bow in hand, as he rallies the survivors. For a moment, it seems Egypt will be annihilated in a single blow. But Ramses is no coward. In Egyptian accounts, carved in stone at Karnak, Abu Simbel, and Luxor, he is depicted as a living god, standing alone against thousands. He rides into the fray, his bowstring snapping, arrows flying like rain. The Hittites press close, their chariots surrounding him, but he charges again and again, breaking their ranks with reckless courage. Egyptian scribes sing of him as Ramses the Great, the bull of mighty valor. Whether truth or propaganda, his survival steadies his men. They regroup, reform, begin to resist. Just as the Egyptians falter again, reinforcements arrive, the Ta division, racing from the south. They smash into the flank of the Hittite chariots, forcing them back. The battle swings wildly. Dust blinds both sides, screams and horns merge in a deafening roar. Muhammad Ali, watching from afar, hesitates. He has infantry in reserve, but they cannot cross the river in time. His great gamble, the chariot ambush, has not destroyed the Egyptians. Now the fight grinds into stalemate. The sun sets on fields littered with broken chariots, shattered shields, the bodies of men and horses tangled in blood and dust. Neither side has won. Neither side has lost. When dawn rises, both armies count their dead. Ramses claims victory, proclaiming that he alone turned the tide, that Egypt triumphed by his hand. Muhammad Ali claims success, pointing out that Kadesh remained in Hittite hands. In truth, it was a draw, the greatest, bloodiest stalemate of the Bronze Age. But from this carnage emerged something new. For years afterward, both empires licked their wounds, wary of resuming such costly war. Eventually, they chose another path. In 1259 BC, Hutti and Egypt signed a treaty, the first known peace treaty in history. Written in both Akkadian and Egyptian, carved into stone, it pledged eternal brotherhood, alliance, and mutual defense. The gods of both lands were called as witnesses. Imagine holding that tablet in your hands, the cuneiform still sharp, the words still binding across 3,000 years. Peace. Eternal friendship. No more war between us. The battlefield of Kadesh, soaked in blood, gave birth to diplomacy. Yet for the soldiers who fought, the treaty was a dream far away. What they remembered was the thunder of hooves, the screams of dying comrades, the crushing weight of chariot wheels. Picture a Hittite charioteer, flung from his vehicle, lying broken in the dust as the sun set. Picture an Egyptian archer, arrow in his chest, gasping for breath as his comrades marched away. Neither knew of treaties, of diplomacy, of eternal brotherhood. They knew only the agony of the battlefield. It is always thus. The kings claim victory. The scribes carve boasts into stone. But the soldiers are left in silence. The Battle of Kadesh became legend. For Egypt, it was propaganda, Ramses immortalized as the lone hero. For the Hittites, it was a reminder of their strength, that they had stood against Egypt and not fallen. For historians, it remains a marvel, the largest chariot battle ever fought, the moment when the world's two greatest powers collided and, astonishingly, chose peace instead of endless war. And for us, standing now in the quiet plain where once dust and blood mingled, it is a reminder that empires are fragile. Even the mightiest kings, even the greatest armies, can find themselves locked in stalemate, forced to seek compromise. As the dust of Kadesh settles, the armies withdraw. The Hittites march north, the Egyptians south. The battlefield is left to the crows and jackals. But the memory remains, written in stone, pressed into clay, whispered in tales. And now, our path carries us from war into politics, into the marriages, alliances, and dynasties that tried to bind empires without bloodshed. Shall we walk into the royal chambers, where daughters are sent across borders, where letters are written in clay, and where diplomacy takes the shape of dynasties? The dust of Kadesh still clings to our sandals, the cries of men and horses fading behind us. Ahead lies silence, not the silence of defeat, but the careful hush of negotiation. For when the blood dried, when the dead were buried and the kings withdrew, another battle began, the battle of diplomacy. And here, the Hittites proved as skilled with clay tablets and royal marriages as they were with iron and chariots. Imagine sitting in a dim chamber of the Hattusa palace. A scribe bends over a tablet of wet clay, stylus in hand, pressing wedges in neat, precise rows. The words are not his own, they are dictated by the king, or by the queen, or by a prince. When finished, the tablet will be dried, sealed with a royal stamp, and sent by courier across mountains and deserts, carried to a foreign court. This was the lifeblood of diplomacy, the clay letter. Thousands have been unearthed, stacked neatly in the archives of Hattusa, each one a fragment of conversation between empires. In them, kings call each other brother, affirming their equal status. Gifts are demanded, grievances aired, promises made. One letter might beg for gold from Egypt. Another might complain that Babylon has not sent the proper dowry. Another still might confirm the marriage of a Hittite princess to a foreign prince. Through these clay tablets, the kings of the Bronze Age argued, flattered, threatened, and wooed. They were the emails of their world, permanent, tangible, carved into earth itself. The Hittite kings were careful with language. When writing to Egypt or Babylon, they addressed the rulers as, "Great King, my brother." This was no casual phrase. To be called brother meant recognition as an equal, not a vassal, not a subject, but a peer in the family of empires. Imagine the pride of a Hittite king reading a letter from Ramses II that begins, "Thus speaks the great king of Egypt, to the great king of Hittite, my brother." It was more than politeness. It was legitimacy, carved into clay, acknowledged across deserts. But woe to the lesser kings, the rulers of smaller states. To them, the great king of Hittite was not brother, but father, or lord. Their letters dripped with submission. "To my lord, my son, thus speaks your servant." They begged for protection, for grain, for chariots. They sent tribute, swore loyalty, and feared betrayal. The Hittite kings managed this delicate hierarchy, weaving alliances and dependencies with careful words. But letters were not enough. Blood bound stronger than clay. Royal marriages were the glue of empire. Daughters of Hattusa were sent across borders, veiled and escorted with pomp, to wed foreign rulers. These unions sealed treaties, calmed rivalries, and created kinship between dynasties. Imagine a princess of Hittite, barely 16, standing at the gates of the capital. Behind her lies the mountain fortress of her birth. Before her stretches a road into foreign lands, Egypt, Babylon, Mitanni. She knows she will never return. Her marriage is not her own choice, but the empire's demand. She is an offering, a living treaty. When she arrives at her new home, she carries more than jewels. She carries legitimacy, her very body a bond between two powers. Should her husband betray Hittite, the insult is doubled, not just political treachery, but familial dishonor. Sometimes these marriages brought peace. Sometimes they brought suspicion, jealousy, and strife. But always, they were instruments of power. And in this dance of diplomacy, the queens of Hittite were not silent. Unlike in many ancient societies, Hittite queens, the Tawananna, wielded real authority. They ruled beside the king, signed treaties, corresponded with foreign courts. Their names appear on tablets, their seals pressed into clay. One such queen, Pujahipa, wife of Hattusa III, stands out as a force of her age. She was no shadowy consort. She negotiated directly with Ramses II, arranging the terms of the famous peace treaty. In letters, she calls Ramses brother, as boldly as her husband did, reminding him that she too ruled by the god's favor. Imagine her voice dictating a letter, clear, confident, unafraid. In a world of men and war, she carved space for diplomacy with wit and steel. And through her, we glimpsed the reality that Hittite queens were not merely brides sent abroad, but partners in the weaving of empire. The culmination of this diplomacy came years after Kadesh. We have already seen the battlefield, the blood, the stalemate. Now imagine the slow process that followed: emissaries shuttling back and forth, scribes pressing drafts into clay, priests swearing oaths before gods. Finally, in 1259 BC, the treaty was sealed. It survives still, carved in Egyptian hieroglyphs on temple walls, and pressed into Hittite cuneiform on clay. Its terms are clear: peace between Hutti and Egypt, eternal friendship between their kings, mutual defense against common enemies, extradition of fugitives. Sworn by the 1,000 gods of Hutti and the gods of Egypt alike. It is astonishing. Not just a truce, but a formal peace treaty, the first in recorded history. A document that sought not just to end war, but to prevent it in the future. Imagine holding the clay tablet, its edges worn but its words unbroken: there shall be no hostilities between them forever. And imagine the relief, however brief, of kings who knew too well the cost of war. But peace was never certain. The same letters that proclaim brotherhood also complain of slights. One Hittite king fumes that the pharaohs sent gifts of gold-plated wood instead of solid gold, an insult disguised as generosity. Another warns that vassals in Syria are wavering, tempted by Egypt's promises. Even marriages could fail. A queen might be neglected, a princess mistreated, a dowry unpaid. Such grievances could unravel alliances as quickly as battles. Diplomacy was a dance on thin ice, performed with careful words, exchanged brides, glittering gifts. Beneath it all lay suspicion, rivalry, ambition. And yet, without it, the empire could not hold. Step back from the grandeur, and imagine the human side. A Hittite princess weeping quietly as she leaves her family behind forever. An Egyptian courtier sneering at the foreign bride who must now be called queen. A scribe in Hattusa sighing as he carves yet another tablet begging for gold, wondering if the pharaoh will send real bullion this time. Diplomacy was made of clay and ink, of parchment and seal, but beneath it beat human hearts, fearful, hopeful, jealous, ambitious. By the late 13th century BC, the Hittite kings had woven a web of alliances across the Near East. Their daughters sat on foreign thrones. Their treaties were sworn by gods from the Nile to the Euphrates. Their clay letters crisscrossed deserts and mountains, carried by weary couriers who risked bandits and storms. And for a time it worked. Hutti stood strong, not only by sword but by word, not only by conquest but by kinship. But webs are fragile. When strands break, the whole net trembles. And soon, the palace of Hattusa would echo not with songs of alliance, but with whispers of intrigue, betrayal, and blood. For diplomacy might bind kingdoms, but dynasties themselves were tinderboxes. Brothers against brothers, queens against kings, ambition gnawing at loyalty. The letters fall silent. The torches gutter. We step now into the palace shadows, where plots are whispered behind carved doors, and where the fate of empires turns not on chariots, but on daggers in the dark. The torches flicker in the halls of Hattusa. Their light dances over stone walls carved with lions, over doorways hung with heavy curtains. Beyond them lie chambers where kings and queens rule, where treaties are sealed, where foreign emissaries bow. Yet listen closely. Beneath the formal words of diplomacy, another sound lingers. Whispers. The palace of the great king was no serene sanctuary. It was a hive of rivalries, of jealousies, of ambitions too sharp to be hidden by ritual. Brothers eyed each other warily, sons plotted against fathers, queens clashed with heirs. And in those intrigues, the empire sometimes bled itself more deeply than in war. To be the great king of Hutti was to live beneath crushing weight. He was ruler, judge, high priest, warlord, the axle on which the empire turned. His word bound vassals, his prayers bound gods, his presence bound armies. But the throne was not easily kept. Succession was rarely smooth. Brothers and cousins jostled for the crown, each with supporters, each with grievances. Queens, powerful in their own right, maneuvered for their sons. Picture the palace court, nobles gathered in tense silence, the king seated high, his sons beside him, the queen's eyes watchful. Every gesture carries meaning. Every glance is a calculation. To falter is to invite rivals to strike. The Tawananna, the Hittite queen, held a position unlike most in the ancient world. She was not simply consort, she was priestess, diplomat, co-ruler. Her seal carried the same weight as the king's. Her influence reached beyond her lifetime. When a king died, the queen retained her title, sometimes clashing with the new ruler. Imagine the tension. A young king ascends, but the dowager queen still holds authority, still presides over rituals, still commands loyalty among priests and scribes. Resentment simmers. Whispers grow. Poison in the cup? A dagger in the dark? We know of bitter rivalries between queens and their stepsons, of accusations hurled, of exiles and executions. The palace was not only a place of feasts and festivals. It was a battlefield, one fought with intrigue instead of chariots. Consider the story of Hattusa III and his nephew Urhi-Teshub. When King Muwaddali II died, he left the throne to Urhi-Teshub, his son. But Hattusa, the dead king's brother, refused to step aside. He had been governor, general, trusted leader in his own right. Why should he bow to a youth? At first, he swore loyalty. But soon, letters revealed discontent. Complaints. Insults. Finally, open rebellion. Hattusa gathered allies, marched against his nephew, seized the throne. Urhi-Teshub fled, appealing desperately to foreign kings, even to Egypt, for aid. But none helped him. He died in exile, while Hattusa ruled. The empire endured, but the fracture remained. Families torn, loyalties broken, trust consumed by ambition. Walk with me through the palace corridors. Behind each doorway lies a drama. Here, a prince sharpens his dagger, whispering to loyal guards. There, a queen speaks quietly with scribes, ensuring letters are drafted in her favor. Down another hall, priests debate which heir the gods favor, their omens shaping destiny as much as armies do. Every feast is theater. The seating order itself is politics. Who sits close to the king? Who is offered the choicest meat? Who receives a cup poured by the queen's own hand? Each gesture is noted, remembered, turned into ammunition. Every silence is as loud as every word. The tablets hint at plots, conspiracies against kings, trials of nobles accused of treason, sudden executions. Sometimes the accused were guilty. Sometimes they were scapegoats, sacrificed to satisfy the gods or to silence rivals. Imagine the scene: a noble dragged before the court, bound in ropes, accused of plotting rebellion. The scribes record the charges, the priests demand oaths. If guilt is declared, punishment is swift: exile, execution, or ritual sacrifice. The palace is never safe. A king might dine in gold cups one evening and lie poisoned in bed the next. A prince might ride at the head of an army, only to be struck down by his brother's orders. Intrigue was not a flaw of the empire. It was part of its rhythm. Even the diplomatic tablets revealed the tension. Foreign rulers write not only of treaties but of gossip from Hattusa. Is your throne secure? Have your brothers rebelled? Is the queen at peace with you? The outside world knew well that the greatest danger to a Hittite king often came from his own family. They watched, waited, sometimes even encouraged discord, hoping to weaken Hutti from within. And so diplomacy and intrigue were entwined. A marriage might bind kingdoms, but it could also breed resentment within the palace. A treaty might strengthen the throne abroad, but at home, rivals could twist it into accusation. Why ally with Egypt? Why favor Babylon? Why trust this vassal and not that one? Step aside from the throne room, and think of the quieter victims. A young prince exiled for life, his ambitions crushed. A queen stripped of power, her name cursed in tablets. Servants who must choose which master to obey, knowing the wrong choice means death. In the palace of Hattusa, survival was never guaranteed. Every smile might hide betrayal. Every ally might become enemy. Even the gods, invoked in endless oaths, seemed fickle in their judgments. As the centuries passed, these intrigues took their toll. Succession crises weakened the throne. Rivalries drained strength from armies. Trust eroded, and with it the unity that bound the empire. The empire that once stood equal to Egypt and Babylon began to wobble, not only from enemies without but from daggers within. The lions still guarded the gates, the walls still stood high, the forges still hammered iron. But inside the palace, cracks spread. And when cracks spread at the center, no wall, however strong, can hold forever. The torches in the palace gutter. The whispers fade into uneasy silence. Outside, storms gather. Enemies press on borders. And when disasters strike, defeat in battle, famine, plague, the people of Hutti do not see mere misfortune. They see the judgment of the gods. Shall we step now into the world of omens and divine punishment, where every defeat was read as heaven's verdict, and where kings trembled beneath the wrath of 1,000 gods? The palace torches die behind us. Outside, the night air is cold, the sky thick with stars. But the Hittites did not see random lights above them, they saw eyes. The gaze of gods, silent yet watchful. Every victory, every famine, every storm was weighed as a message. And when things went wrong, it was never chance. It was judgment. Imagine the great king returning to Hattusa after a crushing defeat. His chariots are shattered, his soldiers weary, his coffers drained. The people line the streets, not cheering but murmuring in unease. Their eyes are not only on him, they are on the heavens. Why did the gods allow this? Which deity was angered? Which vow was broken? The king himself cannot shrug it off. His crown is not only political, it is sacred. He is the high priest of the realm, responsible for keeping the 1,000 gods appeased. If famine strikes, if plague spreads, if enemies triumph, it is his failure. His prayers insufficient. His sacrifices flawed. His vows forgotten. The weight of judgment falls on his shoulders like iron. The Hittites were masters of divination. To them, the gods spoke constantly, if only men would listen. When disaster struck, priests rushed to read omens. They slit open sacrificial animals, studying the livers, their cracks and spots like lines on a map. They poured oil on water, watching how it spread. They examined the flight of birds, the cries of animals, even the shapes of smoke and shadows. Each sign was a clue. Each ritual an interrogation. The gods had punished, but why? Perhaps a festival had been neglected. Perhaps a temple had been defiled. Perhaps an oath sworn by the king's father had gone unfulfilled. The priests scoured records, unrolling old tablets, searching for forgotten promises. And when they found one, it had to be fulfilled at once, even if the king himself had nothing to do with it. Some tablets preserve the prayers of kings brought low by judgment. They read like confessions, raw and desperate. O gods, we do not know why you are angry. Have we neglected your feasts? Have we broken oaths? If so, forgive us. We will restore your temples. We will give sacrifices. Spare your servants. Imagine the great king, the most powerful man in the Near East, kneeling in the temple courtyard, his crown set aside, his hands lifted in supplication. He is no longer conqueror, no longer judge. He is a sinner begging forgiveness. The people watch in silence. If their king is guilty, if the gods have condemned him, their own lives hang in the balance. Judgment came in many forms. A plague could sweep through the land, striking down rich and poor alike. The tablets mention such times, when the population dwindled, when even the palace was not spared. Priests blamed forgotten rituals, broken treaties, angered deities. The remedy was sacrifice, prayer, purification, endless rituals until the gods relented. Famine too was seen as judgment. If rains failed, if locusts devoured the crops, it meant the storm god was displeased. Farmers would join in mass ceremonies, carrying offerings to hilltop shrines, praying for clouds to gather. Even military defeat was divine punishment. If the army lost, it was not simply poor strategy. It was because the gods had withdrawn their favor. Soldiers whispered it among themselves, "The gods are against us. The king has failed." And once whispers of divine abandonment spread, rebellion was never far behind. How did the Hittites seek forgiveness? Through elaborate rituals of purification. Picture a ceremony at the banks of a river. The king stands barefoot, surrounded by priests. Before him lies a lamb, bound but alive. The priests chant, calling on the gods to transfer the sins of the people into the animal. Then the lamb is slain, its blood poured into the river, carrying away guilt. In other rituals, figurines made of clay or wax were used as substitutes. The sins of the nation were symbolically placed upon them, and then they were smashed, buried, or drowned, the burden destroyed. Sometimes, even a human was used symbolically, a scapegoat figure who carried guilt into exile, cast out to die alone in the wilderness. Rare, unsettling, but powerful, a living vessel of judgment. These rituals were not superstition to the Hittites. They were survival. Without them, the gods' anger could consume the empire itself. To break a treaty, to betray an oath, to neglect a festival, all were crimes not against men, but against gods. And the gods judged mercilessly. When treaties were sworn, the curses were vivid. "If you break this oath, may the gods of Hittite and Egypt cut you down. May your lands wither, may your sons perish, may your people be slaves." Imagine living with such words hanging over you. Every promise was a trap. Every failure, no matter how small, could be interpreted as reason for divine wrath. It was not only kings who trembled. Ordinary people too feared judgment. A farmer whose crops failed wondered if he had angered a local deity. A soldier struck by disease questioned if he had broken an oath. A widow with no sons believed the ancestors had cursed her. Every misfortune was trial. Every sorrow was sentence. Now picture the palace once more, but not in triumph. The king sits alone, head bowed, tablets spread before him. Reports of famine. Reports of plague. Reports of defeat. His enemies are not only Assyria or Egypt, they are the gods themselves. He summons priests, he orders rituals, he empties treasuries to restore temples. Yet still, the disasters come. At night, he dreams of angry gods, their faces shadowed, their voices thundering. He wakes trembling, his heart heavy with guilt. This is the judgment of the gods, not only death, but the crushing fear of divine abandonment. For an empire built on the favor of 1,000 gods, the threat of their anger was constant. Kings rose and fell not only by chariots and treaties, but by omens and portents. A bad harvest could undo a dynasty. A plague could topple a throne. The judgment of the gods was not metaphor. It was political reality. When the people believed the gods had turned against the king, his legitimacy vanished. And when legitimacy vanished, daggers gleamed in the palace shadows. The stars blaze above us as we leave the temple of judgment. Their light is cold, pitiless. To the Hittites, they are reminders, the gods are always watching. Every oath, every battle, every harvest is weighed. And as the empire staggered into the 12th century BC, the judgments grew harsher. Famine spread. Enemies pressed harder. Cities rebelled. The gods' wrath seemed unstoppable. And then, suddenly, it was not only wrath. It was collapse. Shall we walk now into the twilight of empire, into the mysterious fall of Hutti, where armies of the sea peoples, hunger, and betrayal tore the kingdom to pieces, and the lions of Hattusa fell silent? The stars still hang over Hattusa, cold and pitiless, as the king kneels in prayer. His voice cracks with exhaustion. O gods, why do you strike us? What vow have we broken? Yet no answer comes. The fires burn low, the people murmur in hunger, and the empire sways like a fortress with cracks in its foundations. This is the beginning of the end. By the early 12th century BC, the Hittite Empire, once master of Anatolia, once feared by Egypt, once ruler of Syria, was faltering. And then, as if swallowed by shadow, it vanished. No chronicler described its final days. No bard sang of its last king. Only ruins remained, and the silence of mountains. The collapse of the Hittites is one of history's great riddles. Scholars still argue, was it famine? Invasion? Internal strife? Or the wrath of gods? Perhaps all at once. Let us walk through the fragments, the whispers, the possibilities. First, famine. The tablets speak of it. Kings begging for grain from Egypt, envoys pleading for shipments of barley and wheat. Letters describe hunger gnawing the land, crops withered, fields barren. The climate itself may have shifted, droughts gripping Anatolia, rains failing year after year. Imagine peasants trudging through cracked earth, seeds in their hands, praying for storms that never came. Their oxen thin, their children gaunt. In villages across the plateau, despair grew. An empire can endure enemies, but hunger corrodes from within. Armies cannot march on empty stomachs. Cities cannot feed their people. The loyalty of vassals falters when the granaries stand bare. Second, invasion. Across the Mediterranean, waves of raiders surged, the so-called sea peoples. Their origins are debated, perhaps displaced migrants, perhaps restless warriors from the Aegean or beyond. What matters is their impact. They swept across coasts, burning, looting, toppling kingdoms. Egypt barely survived their onslaught. Other states fell. Did they reach Hutti? Evidence suggests they struck its western provinces, severing trade routes, cutting off supplies of tin for bronze and grain from abroad. Cities on the fringes burned, their walls blackened. The heartland may have been spared at first, but isolation spread like poison. Imagine a caravan road once bustling with merchants, now abandoned. Watchtowers stand silent, villages razed. The empire, once a network of lifelines, begins to choke. Third, internal strife. The palace of Hattusa was never free from intrigue. Brothers fought brothers, queens quarreled with heirs, nobles rebelled. In stable times, the king's power could suppress these feuds. But in famine, in crisis, loyalty frayed. Imagine vassal kings in Syria, weary of Hutti's demands, declaring independence. Imagine generals turning their armies into warlords, carving territories for themselves. Imagine courtiers whispering that the gods had abandoned the great king, that rebellion was justified. When unity dissolves, even the strongest walls cannot save an empire. And then silence. By around 1200 BC, Hattusa was abandoned. Its gates stood open, its walls unmanned. The great temples of the storm god and the sun goddess fell quiet, their altars cold. Scribes laid down their styluses. The archives ceased. What happened in those final days? Did enemies storm the capital, burning it to ash? Or did the people simply walk away, starving, despairing, leaving lions and sphinxes to guard only emptiness? Archaeology offers fragments, charred timbers, collapsed walls, evidence of fire. But was it conquest? or desperate abandonment. The records are mute. The last Hittite king is unknown. His name lost, his tomb unmarked. One day the empire was there. The next, it was gone. The fall of the Hittites was not unique. Across the Near East, kingdoms toppled in the same years. Mycenaean palaces in Greece burned. Ugarit on the Syrian coast was reduced to ash, its last tablets frozen mid-sentence. Egypt nearly fell. The Bronze Age world unraveled, its great powers collapsing like dominoes. Perhaps the Hittites were victims of this wider storm, swept away by forces too vast to resist. Or perhaps their own cracks, hunger, rebellion, divine doubt, left them vulnerable. Whatever the cause, the result was the same. An empire that had endured for centuries, that had stood equal to Egypt and Babylon, vanished without farewell. Now stand with me once more at the lion gate of Hattusa. The carved beasts still glare, their jaws open in frozen roar. But there are no soldiers passing, no priests chanting, no kings riding in triumph. Only silence. Grass grows between the stones. The walls crumble, their towers fallen. The once bustling capital lies empty, its great archives buried under earth. For 3,000 years, the world forgot. Travelers passed the ruins, calling them works of giants. Villagers quarried their stones for houses. The lions stood watch over nothing. The empire had collapsed so completely that even memory failed. Think of that. Rome fell, but Romans remembered Rome. Egypt waned, but its monuments kept its name alive. Babylon faded, yet its shadow lingered in scripture and legend. But Hutti? It vanished. So total was the collapse that for millennia, not even a whisper of its kings remained. Only in the 19th century, when clay tablets were unearthed, did the Hittites return to history. Their disappearance was not only political, it was erasure. And so we leave the ruins, heavy with silence. The fields are empty, the granaries bare, the temples cold. The great king no longer kneels in prayer. The 1,000 gods receive no offerings. The empire of the Hittites is gone. Yet the stones still stand, half buried, waiting. And in those stones, and in the memory of neighboring peoples, faint echoes linger. Shall we walk among those ruins now, in the centuries after collapse, when only broken gates and scattered legends preserve the shadow of Hutti? The empire has fallen. The kings are dead, the armies scattered, the gods silent. Hattusa stands hollow, its gates gaping to the wind. The great granaries are empty. The palace courts echo with nothing but crows. What remains is ruin. Imagine walking through Hattusa a few years after its abandonment. The streets are littered with broken pottery, bones gnawed by dogs, tools left where they last fell. A wooden chariot, its wheels collapsed, leans against a wall. In the great temple, the altar stones are cold, blackened with the ghosts of old sacrifices. Nature creeps back. Grass pushes through cracks in the stone. Owls nest in the towers. Foxes slip through the courtyards at night. Slowly, patiently, the earth begins to reclaim what men once built. Yet the lions at the gates still stand. Weathered, chipped, but fierce. They guard emptiness now, watching over a city that breathes only with the wind. Generations pass. The memory of the Hittite kings fades. Neighboring peoples remember only fragments, tales of powerful warriors in the mountains, half-legendary figures who once defied Egypt. By the time scribes of later ages wrote their chronicles, Hutti had dissolved into myth. The Bible mentions Hittites, but only as a small tribe, a shadow of what once was. No one imagined an empire. No one believed the lions of Hattusa had ever roared over half a continent. The silence deepens. Centuries blur into centuries. The ruins endure storms, earthquakes, winters of snow and summers of blazing heat. Stones tumble, walls collapse, but the foundations remain. Travelers in the Middle Ages stumble upon the ruins, bewildered. Who built this? Giants, perhaps. or ancient kings of legend. They marvel at the gates, at the size of the walls, but no name remains to give meaning to the stones. Imagine standing there as a medieval wanderer. You touch the lion carvings, their faces rough with erosion. You see walls stretching across hills, larger than anything you know. You wonder what gods were worshipped here, what kings ruled from these heights. But you cannot know. You turn away, leaving the ruins to the wind once more. And yet, ruins remember, even when men forget. The carved lions still glower. The sphinxes still gaze, their features blurred but unmistakable. Beneath the soil, the clay tablets wait, silent archives preserved by earth itself. The empire is gone, but its voice is not destroyed, only buried. This, perhaps, is the strange gift of ruins. They are patient. Where flesh rots and memory fails, stone lingers. A wall fallen to rubble still hints at its original height. A broken relief still whispers of gods once honored. A tablet unread still holds words. Hattusa became a ghost, but a ghost that refused to vanish entirely. Walk with me through the ruins now, as they lie in their long sleep. The sun bakes the stones by day, painting them pale. At night, the stars wheel overhead, cold and eternal. No festivals, no sacrifices, no armies, only silence. But in that silence, listen closely. Can you hear it? The faint echo of drums, of hooves, of chanting priests? The memory clings, even if only in imagination. The ruins of Hattusa were not destroyed, they were paused. Held in suspension, waiting for the world to remember them. Over 1,000 years pass. The Assyrians rise, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans. Each builds empires, each leaves monuments. Yet the Hittites remain forgotten, their ruins anonymous among Anatolian hills. The lions watch them all. Armies march past, Persian horsemen, Alexander's phalanxes, Roman legions, but none know the name of the city they pass. Still the stones wait. Only in the 19th century, when European travelers and scholars wander through Anatolia with notebooks and sketch pads, does curiosity stir again. They marvel at the lion gates, at the sphinxes, at walls stretching mile after mile. They wonder, who built this? The answer will come with the tablets, with Hrosny's decipherment, with the revelation that these ruins once held an empire forgotten for 3 millennia. But for now, in this long night of history, Hattusa lies still. There is something haunting in these ruins. To stand among them is to feel both the fragility and endurance of human effort. The empire collapsed. The names of kings were erased. The gods fell silent. But the stones endured. And perhaps that is their final judgment. That even when memory failed, even when history turned its back, the ruins remained as testimony. Not boasting, not demanding, only existing, waiting to be remembered. We step out of the ruins now, the lions still watching us with blind eyes. The empire is gone, but its shadow lingers in stories told by neighbors, in fragments of legend that survived where the city itself did not. Shall we listen to those legends now, to the echoes left in the memory of others, where the Hittites lived on not as history, but as myth? The stones of Hattusa lay buried, the tablets unread, the temples cold. But memory is a strange thing. Even when an empire falls into silence, its shadow can live on, in rumor, in myth, in the stories of others. The Hittites were gone, but they were not entirely forgotten. Centuries after the collapse, scribes of Israel and Judah wrote their chronicles, gathering histories, laws, and genealogies. In their writings, the Hittites appear not as a mighty empire, but as a people among others in Canaan. A tribe, a remnant. Abraham, it is said, purchased a burial cave from Ephron the Hittite. Esau married Hittite wives. Uriah the Hittite served as a loyal soldier under King David. To those scribes, the Hittites were neighbors, not emperors, not rulers of half the Near East, but one people among many. Their memory had shrunk, the grandeur forgotten, reduced to fragments of a name. Yet the name itself endured, echoing faintly across the centuries. In Egypt, the story was different. Pharaohs could not forget Kadesh. Ramses II carved his victory upon the walls of temples from Karnak to Abu Simbel, proclaiming how he fought alone against the Hittites. Imagine pilgrims centuries later, gazing at the reliefs, reading the hieroglyphs. They see Hittite chariots, Hittite warriors, the treaty carved in stone. Even as Hutti itself disappeared, Egypt preserved its memory in propaganda. But without Hattusa, without the archives, the full picture faded. Egyptians remembered the enemy, but not the empire's vastness, its thousand gods, its iron secrets. To the rising Assyrians, the Hittites were not entirely gone. In the centuries after Hattusa fell, Assyrian kings wrote of campaigns against lands of Hutti. But these were not the empire of old. They were fragments, Neo-Hittite city-states scattered across Syria and Anatolia, small kingdoms that clung to Hittite traditions long after the heartland collapsed. Their kings still built fortresses, still carved lions and sphinxes, still worshipped the storm god. Imagine walking through one of these cities in the 9th century BC. The language has shifted, the power diminished, but the art is familiar. Reliefs of chariots, gods, and kings still adorn the gates. The memory of Hutti lived on here, flickering, diminished but unextinguished. These Neo-Hittite states became the bridge between the lost empire and later memory, the last embers of a fire nearly gone. In Anatolia itself, the ruins never disappeared. Villagers saw the massive walls, the carved lions, the strange inscriptions. They did not know the builders' names, but they wove stories. Some said giants had raised the stones. Others said ancient kings of impossible wealth had ruled there. Children whispered that the lions came alive at night, their roars echoing through the mountains. This is how ruins survive when history fails, as legends, as mysteries too vast to ignore. Hattusa became not Hutti, but a place of marvel, of fear, of wonder. The Hittite gods too lingered in strange ways. The storm god of Hutti, Tezhub, did not vanish entirely. In the traditions of Anatolia and Syria, storm deities endured: Baal, Hadad, Tarhunt. Names changed, but the figure remained, the warrior of the skies, wielder of thunder, bringer of rain. In myths and festivals of later peoples, one can still glimpse his shadow, echoing through centuries. The gods of Hutti had been many, but their strongest never entirely died. Yet memory is fickle. To some, Hittite became a label detached from truth. Greek writers spoke vaguely of Anatolian peoples, sometimes blurring them with others. Biblical tradition cast them as minor tribes. Their true identity lay buried, unrecognized. For 3,000 years, the world knew the name but not the empire. A memory without substance, a shadow without body. Only in the modern age would scholars peel back the layers of legend, decipher cuneiform, and restore Hutti to its true stature. Only then would the tribe of the Bible be revealed as a vanished superpower, the rival of Egypt, the master of iron and chariots. But before that revelation, for centuries, the Hittites lived only in fragments, in temple walls, in biblical verses, in ruined stones that villagers called the work of giants. It was enough to keep them from vanishing completely. There is a kind of poetry in this half-memory. The Hittites, who once claimed 1,000 gods, became themselves like gods in legend, mysterious, half-forgotten, glimpsed only in shadow. Their empire fell, their archives lay buried, yet their name whispered across millennia, never wholly erased. To be remembered wrongly is still to be remembered. And now, as the last echoes of legend fade, we reach the end of our journey. From the vanished empire to rediscovery, from the thunder of Kadesh to the silence of ruins, from gods to intrigue, from iron to famine, the Hittites leave us with riddles. Shall we step into the conclusion, to gather these fragments together, to reflect on an empire of dark secrets and forgotten grandeur? The night settles over Anatolia. The hills are dark, the stars sharp. The lions of Hattusa still stand, their eyes blind yet eternal. We pause here, at the end of the road, to gather all that we have seen. The Hittite Empire was once a colossus, a power equal to Egypt, Assyria, Babylon. Its armies shook the earth, its treaties carved the first peace into history. It mastered iron, it worshipped 1,000 gods, it sacrificed blood upon stone. And yet, it vanished so completely that for 3,000 years, no one remembered it. What kind of empire leaves behind such silence? One built on secrets. The Hittites remind us that history is not only what is remembered, but also what is lost. They built walls 20 feet thick, temples vast enough to house whole cities of gods, archives filled with tens of thousands of tablets, and still, they disappeared. Think of it, the Egyptians endured, their pyramids blazing through time. The Greeks endured, their myths echoing across centuries. Even Mesopotamia lived on in legend. But Hutti was swallowed whole. Why? Perhaps because they spread themselves too thin, too many gods, too many enemies, too many rivalries. Perhaps because their mountains, their fortress capital, shielded them in life but hid them in memory. Or perhaps because their collapse was so sudden, so absolute, that no one remained to tell their story. The forgotten do not write their epitaphs. And yet, in fragments, the world of Hutti still breathes. The clang of iron from their forges. The roar of chariots at Kadesh. The whispered prayers of kings begging gods for mercy. The laughter of crowds during festivals, bread and beer piled high before divine statues. The silence of famine, children staring at barren fields. The hiss of blood across altars, dark smoke curling to the sky. Their story is not one of light alone. It is shadows, contradictions. 1,000 gods, and yet 1,000 doubts. A peace treaty carved in stone, and yet dynasties torn by betrayal. Iron weapons to terrify the world, and yet hunger that hollowed their people. The Hittite Empire is not a tale of perfection. It is a tale of survival, fragile, brutal, magnificent, doomed. To study the Hittites is to glimpse how thin the line of memory is. That even a superpower can vanish, that even kings who called themselves great can be erased. It is also to glimpse humanity in its most familiar forms. Their kings argued like politicians today. Their queens wrote letters, asserting their voices with wit and power. Their soldiers drank and gambled after battle, just as modern ones do. Their people worried about crops, about weather, about debts, about the favor of unseen forces. They were not alien. They were us, only in another age, beneath another sky, with other gods. And yet, something about them resists full comprehension. Their pantheon was too vast, their archives too fragmented, their fall too silent. They are an empire of riddles. Did they truly master iron first, or only glimpse its promise? Did they sacrifice humans often, or only in rare desperation? Was Hattusa abandoned by choice, or burned by conquest? Did their gods die with them, or live on in other names, other lands? These questions remain, like shadows at the edge of torchlight. Perhaps they will never be answered. Perhaps that is fitting. For the Hittites, who themselves built a religion of multiplicity, ambiguity, and mystery, leave us a legacy that mirrors their own world, complex, uncertain, full of gods and ghosts. Stand now once more at the Lion Gate. The wind whispers through cracks in the stone. The stars blaze above. The city is empty, but the silence is not meaningless. It is the silence of a story that has ended, but not died. For the Hittites remind us that history is fragile. That what we know today may vanish tomorrow. That power is fleeting, but stones remember. And so, our journey ends. We have walked with kings and queens, priests and soldiers, peasants and captives. We have heard the roar of Kadesh, the chants of sacrifice, the clang of the forge. We have seen famine hollow the land, intrigue tear the palace, judgment fall from the gods. We have stood among ruins, listened to legends, traced shadows back into light. The Hittite Empire, forgotten for millennia, now lives again, in tablets deciphered, in stones uncovered, in stories retold. But it does not return as a tale of triumph alone. It returns as a warning, a reminder, a whisper, that even the greatest can vanish, leaving only fragments for strangers to piece together. And perhaps that is the truest legacy of Hutti. Not the walls, not the treaties, not even the iron, but the silence, the mystery. The dark secrets that force us to lean closer, to listen harder, to imagine what once was. The night deepens. The ruins grow colder. The lions still keep watch. And so, as the stars turn slowly over the Anatolian hills, may the echoes of the Hittites, their iron, their blood, their gods, their silence, guide us gently into dreams. For their empire may be gone, but their whispers remain,